42 years ago now, Dr. George Engel, who's an internist and a psychiatrist, pointed out that the dominant model of medicine today is biomedical, with molecular biology its basic scientific discipline. It assumes disease to be fully accounted for by deviations from the norm of measurable biological variables, and it leaves no room within its framework for the social, psychological, and behavioral dimensions of illness. The biomedical model embraces mind-body dualism, the doctrine that separates the mental from the somatic. Now, George Engel wrote that in 1977, and he called for a new model of what he termed a biopsychosocial model, one that would recognize that the biology of human beings is inseparable from their psychological and social interactions and milieu. Well, how far have we become in nearly half a century since he wrote those words? Dr. Norman Deutsch, who's a Canadian psychiatrist, who talks about brain development and neuroplasticity, wrote a couple of years ago, modern scientific medicine has taken a fundamentally materialist approach and is analytical, meaning that it divides wholes into parts. It often proceeds by reducing complex phenomena to their more elementary chemical and physical components, viruses, genes, molecules. Now, the idea that we need to be looking at interconnections rather than individuals to explain what happens to us as human beings is not a new one. That's what's maybe puzzling about it, or certainly interesting about it. 2,500 years ago, the Buddha talked about what he called the interconnected co-arising of phenomena. He said nothing arises on its own. And he talked about Thich Nhat Hanh, the great Buddhist teacher today, who's now in his 90s and I think in his last months of life. But he talks about interbeing. He says we not are, he says we inter-are. That our being is connected to every other being. And the Buddha put it in terms of looking at a leaf or a raindrop. And he said, when you look at that leaf or raindrop, he says, contemplate every moment all the interconnections that were necessary for the creation of that leaf or raindrop. So a raindrop or a leaf, for example, the chlorophyll, the photosynthesis reflects or depends on the sunshine, the earth, which gives it the materials that make up the leaf, and of course the sky, the water, the irrigation. That leaf contains the earth, sun, and sky. And for him, this wasn't just an intellectual knowledge. I mean, intellectually we all know this. But actually when we walk through the world, including myself, and I don't live in that kind of consciousness. We don't live in this consciousness of interbeing, even if we intellectually recognize it. And this separation then, this individualization, reflects itself in how we look at health, how we look at mental health, and certainly how we look at society. Now, modern science is coming around to that holistic view again. And now we have all kinds of research to show that, in fact, you can't understand human beings that way. So Dan Siegel and his concept of interpersonal neurobiology, which begins with the idea that in order to understand the mind, you can't just start with either biology or neurobiology or neurophysiology or neurology or psychiatry or anthropology or history or sociology or psychology or psychiatry in separation. But that all these disciplines are necessary to understand the functioning of the human brain and mind. Well, one way to understand interpersonal biology, from my perspective, of course, is its original meaning, that it takes the study of all these disciplines to understand our functioning. But another way to understand it is that actually this reflects reality, that neurobiology is interpersonal, that how our nervous system functions and how our brain functions and how our thoughts or emotions go aren't individual phenomena, but they reflect the interconnected co-arising of phenomena, just as the Buddha said. And if our neurobiology is interpersonal, then by definition our biology is also interpersonal. Because of course, the nervous system affects so much of the functioning of our intestines and our heart and our immune system and our hormonal apparatus. These are all interactive. These are not separate systems at all. They're expressions of a whole unit. Which is to say that the biology of a human being can't be understood in individual terms, that our entire biological system is indeed interpersonal. So we need to talk about an interpersonal biology. So when we look at something like the asthma of the woman the minority person who suffers more racism, now we can understand it as not simply the personalized physiological response or experience of an isolated human being, but as the social malaise. And then the question is, what are we going to do about it?